2019. What a year for movies. Controversies, finales, surprises, letdowns, it was all there. And now comes the time of year where I talk about the films that I enjoyed the most. Except this year, it's a little bit different. For one, I'm sick, so that's gonna make for a great recording. But B, and somewhat more importantly, instead of doing the usual top 10 of the year, I thought I'd go through every 2019 movie I saw this year briefly from worst to best. For one, this way I can talk about films that I wouldn't get the chance to talk about otherwise. And also, I've been a bit busy this year, so there are still a lot of movies I haven't seen yet. So I still wanted to make this end of year video, but it would feel a little weird to make a top 10 when there's so many that I have not seen yet. So this way, I'll talk about the films I've seen so far, rank them, and in that there will be a top 10 list. And then once I've seen more movies, I can make a part 2 of this. So it's a win-win. Except I'm still sick. Alright, so with all that said, let's get into my ranking from worst to best of the 27 movies I saw in cinemas in 2019. Or on Netflix in some cases. Starting with Gemini Man. Will Smith fights Will Smith, and then spoiler alert, they team up to fight Will Smith. Come on, a movie with triple Smiths? That's my least favorite film of 2019? Yes, it's real bad. In terms of stuff I liked, I think Mary Elizabeth Winstead is okay. A surprise Wong is always a good thing. I think Will Smith is decent sometimes, especially the part where he goes,
"You made a person out of another person."
Just kidding, that was not good. Some action is okay, and the de-aging effects for the most part look pretty great. But besides that, most of the acting isn't very good. Some of the action is quite bad, with some straight up 2002 rubbery person CGI. The writing and dialogue and story are pretty awful, and sometimes, especially towards the end, the de-aging is very noticeable. It's just a pretty bad movie that doesn't have much entertainment value, even as a so bad it's good movie. Then there's Glass, I believe the first movie I saw this year. Yeah, really kicked things off in a great way. To be honest, this movie isn't horrible. It's got some worthwhile stuff in it, mainly the performances. James McAvoy especially, again, takes a role that could be so laughable and actually pulls it off. And some concepts throughout the plot are interesting, and it's pretty well shot. But ultimately, it's mostly comprised of a disappointing twist, lackluster action scenes, unintentionally funny moments, some nonsensical plot points, and overall, it was just thoroughly one of the least memorable cinema experiences of the year for me. Alright, up next, XMen Dark Phoenix. McAvoy's had quite the year, hasn't he? Yeah, this was a disappointment, but not really surprising. To be honest though, I didn't think this was as bad as everyone else was saying. The worst X-Men movie? Yeah, no. It does have some decent action in it. The finale on the train in particular has some interesting moments, and the opening space mission is kinda well done, but beyond that, it doesn't have much of note. Everything else is either mediocre or bad, the acting is pretty subpar, and the actors that are very talented and trying their best just don't really succeed because of how awful their dialogue is. The story is predictable, the villains aren't very interesting, it's just crazy how they managed to make two bad versions of the same story. And if anything, the second time around may have been worse. Up next, Maleficent 2, Mistress of Evil. Now I know the fact that this is here will provoke a lot of questions. A, how is this above Glass and Dark Phoenix? And B, of all the movies, why did I even see this in the first place? Well, the answer to B is too long and convoluted to get into now, but the other one, it's not horrible. Don't get me wrong, it's not good either, but it's kind of bizarrely entertaining because of how weird it gets at points. Okay, the story for the first 2/3, pretty bland. The villain, over the top. The writing, not great. Some of the acting, arguably most of the acting, also not great. I mean, it is a kids movie, so I'm not expecting the most complicated or revolutionary plot or character arcs, but as we'll see with some kids movies later, you can add more layers to these films and still have them appeal to kids. That all being said, there were some elements in this that I didn't feel were totally bland. I mean, story-wise, there are a few turns it takes, especially towards the end, that I don't even know if they're good, but it's so different from what I was expecting, and it was just kind of bizarre, that I found it entertaining in a way. The finale is so odd that I don't know, at least I was interested. I would rather have a movie entertain me through it being weird and maybe not all that good than just being, nothing and totally bland. Besides that, Angelina Jolie isn't awful as Maleficent, although this is not an Oscar-winning performance or anything. And the visual effects for the most part are pretty decent. But yeah, I mean, it's not a great kids movie for most of it, but some of it is weird enough to be entertaining. So if you caught parts of it on TV, I don't think it'd be the worst thing in the world. I saw It Chapter 2. I made a review of this not too long ago. Poor McAvoy again. He's trying his best in these films, and he's one of the better, if not the best part of them, but he might want to look into getting a new agent or something. Anyway, I wasn't really impressed with it. I liked some parts of it, namely the cast, some of the scares, the way it's shot, but the pacing is just horrible. It's way too long, and the horror sequences, especially around the middle, continuously fall into the same formula and get incredibly repetitive. Plus, by the end of it, it gets a bit too pretentious and self-congratulatory for its own good. I think if someone edited this down, there could be a good movie in there somewhere, but as of right now, it's a bit of a bloated mess with some good stuff in it. Alright, Star Wars, The Rise of Skywalker. Can't wait to hear about why this is the best or worst movie ever for the next couple of years. I honestly thought this was fine. Not really consistently fine, but fine in the sense that some parts were quite good, and then some parts were quite bad. The first half hour, maybe hour, is such a bizarre pacing and editing mess. I don't know how that happens with a film of this size, but the transitions between scenes and the way the movie jumps between storylines feels almost like a trailer, and it's very jarring. A lot of the film, especially that first half, also feels a lot like a video game, from the plot and also just down to the action scenes and small moments, like with that snake creature thing. It feels more like you're watching someone play a video game at points, not like it's this immersive cinematic world where anything could happen. I don't want to act like this is the worst movie ever though. The cast is actually quite good, namely the main three, who have been the strongest part of this new trilogy for me, all put in good performances here. The music's fantastic, the visual effects are amazing. Honestly, these new Star Wars films have some of the best visual effects of modern day blockbusters. There are some really cool moments, some that did make me genuinely smile, even as someone who doesn't really have much attachment to Star Wars. Some moments did still get to me. And if you want payoffs to a lot of Star Wars things and characters, from major to quite minor, there are plenty of those here. I guess it kind of feels satisfying in that sense, but in many other senses, it doesn't really feel satisfying. I felt some were a little rushed or went in a bit of a reactionary direction. And on that note, this definitely feels like a reaction to The Last Jedi. It's like, oh, there weren't enough lightsaber fights? Here are a million. And then also down to different plot stuff, which I won't mention now for spoilers. But yeah, if you hated The Last Jedi for its choices with the Star Wars universe, I guess you'll like this more. I don't know, some of it also felt a bit like fanfiction, a little bit like Game of Thrones Season 8, where it feels more like someone went, oh, wouldn't it be cool if blank, and didn't really develop it much more beyond that, or asked if it really fit in with the established characters and story. I'm also kind of confused on some of the plot points, one in particular, where it feels like there's a big chunk missing, and the movie just acts like that's always been a thing, when I'm pretty sure it hasn't. You can probably guess what I'm talking about. Also, this new trilogy is so weird in terms of continuity. Like, yes, they're all the same cast and a continuing storyline, kind of. But Force Awakens is a soft reboot remake of A New Hope. The Last Jedi is a more experimental Rian Johnson film that has a pretty definitive end. And then this feels simultaneously like an epilogue and an entirely new trilogy crammed into one film. It's very bizarre. Honestly, I kind of nothinged this movie when I walked out of it, which is a shame for a saga-ending film. I didn't think it was great, I didn't think it was horrible, it was mostly entertaining, I suppose. I was just like, alright, that's Star Wars done for now. Has some good elements in it, but it's a very mixed bag. I watched the Lego Movie 2, the second part, another movie I kind of just nothinged. Honestly, this probably should be higher up, because technically as a film, it is probably better than a few of the ones I have coming up. The thing is, I just didn't really feel much of anything towards it, and I forgot about it pretty soon after I saw it, which was just starkly in contrast to how much I enjoyed the first film and how much it stuck with me. It's got most of what you'd want from this kind of film. The animation's fantastic and creative, the voice acting's good, it's generally pretty funny, although I found the first half hour to be not great, but it gets better. The story's alright, although in trying to replicate the heart of the first film, it doesn't always succeed. But to be fair, there was some new stuff they did here which I didn't think was bad. If you like these movies, I think you'll like this. It's good, it just didn't really stick with me at all. I also saw Hobbs Shaw this year, and yeah, it was kind of disappointing. It was disappointing in a weird way, because it gave me exactly what I wanted from this kind of film. It's another one that just didn't really stick with me, and I'll get into why I think that is in a second. Dwayne Johnson and Jason Statham are fun together, but it's one of those situations where it's something that worked well in smaller doses as a subplot of a film, I'd argue the best part of it. When you make it the sole focus, it loses some of its magic. So I guess I was also wrong in thinking that a whole film of them together would be as fun as their scenes in Fast 8. But they are still good together. The action scenes are mostly quite good, the hand-to-hand stuff is definitely my favorite, and by the end it gets a little too green screen CGI. The story is pretty generic, the villain, while well performed, isn't anything special. It's just fine. It's fun for quite a bit of it, but it's nothing exceptional. I think this movie suffers from A, the trailers showing everything, and B, its runtime. Because both those things lead to, at some point towards the end, this movie just kind of going in one ear and out the other. Because it goes on for so long, you start to get kind of numb to this crazy action, and it's kind of sensory overload. And so by the final act, it's just kind of dull. And it also doesn't progress or build in an engaging way, like, for example, Mission Impossible 6, where it has crazy stuff going on throughout it, but by the end, with that finale, you are still totally engaged, and that's one of my favorite action movie finales ever. I don't know, I think it's fun in parts, and if it comes on TV or is on Netflix or something, yeah, give it a try, but it's not anything mind-blowing, it's exactly what you think it is. Alright, let's get this out of the way. Shazam is next. Yes, Shazam is this low on the list. I know everyone loved this movie, and I definitely loved some parts of it, namely Zachary Levi and Jack Dylan Grazer. I think most of the stuff with them together is very funny and charming. And there are some great moments, like when Billy first flies. But besides that, I was kind of very underwhelmed by most of it. Many of the visual effects were poor, some of the humor was kind of predictable, and I didn't find it that funny. Some of the emotional beats also I found a bit predictable, and I didn't really feel invested in any of the side characters. Honestly, it's not a bad movie, and I do think this is a case where it somewhat suffered from the hype. Based on what people were saying about this, I was expecting quite a bit more than what it ended up being. I know this is one of my more controversial opinions of the year. If you loved it, then that's great. You can be happy that you got to enjoy 2 hours more than I did. I think it's an okay movie, but I didn't love it. And as if that didn't get people disliking this video enough, after that is Captain Marvel. Honestly, I think these are about as good as each other for completely different reasons. Captain Marvel is totally fine for the most part. To me, it was just very, very bland. There wasn't a lot that stood out. I mean, Brie Larson's pretty good as Carol, Sam Jackson's really fun as Nick Fury, and the de-aging with him is fantastic. There are some funny moments, Talos is great, but man, so much of this movie, from the plot to the action scenes, is just okay. It sounds like a weird complaint, but I just found it quite bland and forgettable. Like, there isn't that much wrong with it, besides the sometimes wonky effects, but nothing really stands out about it. And given where the MCU is now and what we've seen they can do, I guess I was hoping for a bit more. And like I said before, I generally enjoy a film with large flaws that is entertaining over a movie that's competently made, but just not very memorable. Which is why, with time, this could switch around with other films on my list. I don't know, it's a whole thing. But, to be fair to it, it does have entertaining moments and some solid technical aspects that shouldn't be overlooked. It's totally fine, and at points, something a bit more than that. Alright, then I saw Good Boys. I'm gonna see if I can finish recording this before my voice completely disappears. Yeah, not a hell of a lot to say about this one. It's a pretty funny movie. The main kids are quite funny together, it's got some good moments, it's got a decent, if not simple message, but it's a comedy. I wasn't expecting a huge moral message here. Not every joke lands, and the gross-out humor gets a bit repetitive at a point, but overall, it's a fun comedy. Check it out if it looks like something you'd enjoy. Like Hobbs Shaw, it's exactly what it looks like. Then up next is John Wick Chapter 3, which I did actually find a bit disappointing. But okay, let's get this out of the way. The action is probably the best in any film of this year. The stunt work, cinematography, sound design, and editing makes for some of the most intense, exciting, brutal, and impressive action I've ever seen in a film. That knife fight is one of the greatest action scenes of the decade, and possibly of any action film, in my opinion. The performances are also mostly solid. Keanu is a perfect fit for this character again. Where this film faltered a lot for me was the story. The story in this is easily the weakest of all the John Wick films. The first film was more grounded, but with this crazy assassin world kind of teased, but it was ultimately a simple premise. Dog from deceased wife is killed, so Hitman's out for revenge. The second film, I think, struck the perfect balance of simple-ish premise, and then this weird and honestly quite interesting assassin society lore. But this one then just indulged in it too much. And with the amount of lore they're trying to build into these, it's not as interesting or engaging as how that kind of stuff was handled in the previous films, that being either more in the background or somewhat more grounded. I also think besides that, the plot scenes aren't great. They start to feel very repetitive, and they're quite removed from the action. The fact that I call them plot scenes at all is kind of a problem. A person visits someone from their past to get some kind of favor, or this high-table assassin person goes and asks about John Wick and then threatens someone. It kind of just feels like they had these epic action scenes, and then the plot, especially in the first half, they were like, yeah, let's just put these scenes in here to tie the action together. Even if the plot scenes themselves aren't that well done or interesting. Or let's pile on the rules and lore and politics of this assassin society, which to me at least was intriguing in the previous films, but was never the most interesting part of them. I would say that would be the more personal and simple motives for John Wick. The assassin society stuff was a great backdrop to put it in, which helped aid the story, but it was never the driving force of it, especially in the first one. The film also goes on for a bit too long, to the point where it starts to get a bit Hobbs and Shaw, in the sense that you're so numb to all of this that you start to just not really be engaged. And the ending is a real not subtle fourth movie setup that honestly, I wasn't even that excited for by the end of this. In terms of action, this is probably the best John Wick. In terms of story, it's the worst. Overall, I think it's worth it for the action and some of the performances, but otherwise, this wasn't that great to me. Okay, then I saw Booksmart. Similarly to Good Boys, not a ton to say here. It's pretty funny, the two leads are funny and work really well together, they bounce off each other in a really fun way. It's got some decent heartfelt moments, it's good, I really enjoyed it. The reason it isn't higher is that it didn't really blow me away. Like everyone was saying, it's one of the best of the year, and I thought it was pretty funny, but it wasn't like the funniest movie I've ever seen. In fact, for me, a lot of the jokes were more of the kind where you think, oh, that's funny, instead of actually laughing out loud. It was pretty good, and that's perfectly fine for a movie, just means it's at this spot on my list. Then, kind of the opposite scenario, a comedy I hadn't heard that much about, but I ended up really enjoying, Long Shot. No, it's not that groundbreaking, but as far as a romantic comedy, it's really well done. I mean, it made me laugh quite a lot, and the two leads have good chemistry. That's what most people are looking for in a romantic comedy. Beyond that, its political message doesn't feel forced or preachy. It works mostly naturally with the story. It's a funny movie that I don't know if a lot of people saw, so check it out. How to Train Your Dragon 3, it's one of the best animated films of the year. Beautiful animation, great music, a fun story that maybe is a little bit messy, in which some of the pieces don't fit together totally naturally, but it's all tied together with a powerful and satisfying ending. Up next, Spiderman Far From Home. Really enjoyable MCU film. It's got fun performances, one of the best MCU villains, some good comedy, some solid action. It's not as good as Homecoming. Some action isn't super engaging. Some themes seem a bit confused or contradictory, and there are just some moments like this. But overall, very fun MCU film. Up next is Ford v Ferrari. I don't think it's at all perfect, but it's very entertaining and somewhat intense. The performances are really good and convincing. When you get Damon and Bale, you know you're getting good performances, and they have great chemistry. The film's also very well shot, and the racing scenes are for the most part excellent. They're exciting, intense, exactly what the film wants you to feel in those scenes. As far as the negatives, the film is a bit too long. It's 2.5 hours, and some of this stuff I think definitely could have been left on the cutting room floor. And the other problem I had might be a result of too high expectations, but I was under the impression this was more of an Oscar movie, or I guess a more complicated or more mature movie. Trust me, I also hate how pretentious that sounds. But I guess what I'm saying is, I was surprised by how simple a lot of the story beats were, and how cartoonish some of the dialogue and acting at times was. I don't really know if that's a complaint though, because I have a feeling if I'd been more aware of that going in, it wouldn't have affected my movie watching experience as much. But it also might have, so just putting it out there now, this movie is a bit cartoonish or simplistic at times. Overall, a very entertaining film from James Mangold. Now, I'm actually surprised that this is in my top 10, but I've got Joker up next. I'm surprised because I didn't like this as much as a lot of other people did. I do not think it's an absolute masterpiece, but I do still think it's a really good movie. I'm trying not to let expectations sway me, because I think I might have liked this less because people were praising it as this insane, amazing movie, and so I think I was a bit more let down. But just looking at it without all that build-up, yeah, it is really good. Joaquin Phoenix obviously carries it. That's the one part of the film that I feel is truly deserving of all praise. He's fantastic as this character. He's able to sell some not so great writing, and when the writing is good or decent, he excels with it. The film is genuinely disturbing in a few points, not in like a Saw way where it's going to make you throw up or something, but tension is built and paid off effectively. That being said, there are major problems with the script, like some writing is so on the nose and not subtle, and some characters seem to act more for the sake of the plot progressing than how they would more realistically act. And honestly, when I think about it, this movie flips over and over in my head. It flips between the really great stuff, and then the stuff I wasn't really a fan of. This could move up or down this list, but for now it's here. I mean, you've all seen it. It's quite good. I just don't think it's this insane masterpiece that some people do. I will say, once I've seen more films, like I mentioned at the start, and make another video, this is one that I can imagine being bumped off my top 10 list. Alright, here's another controversial placement. Yesterday. This got middling to bad reviews when it came out. I'm pretty sure it was on Variety's worst movies of 2019 list. I don't know what that's about, but I will concede, this is more of a personal pick. I mean, all of these are personal, but with this one, I do understand that this probably won't be in most people's top 10, but I kinda loved it. Alright, I will say, not that crazy about the ending, but besides that, I really enjoyed almost all of this. I think it's a great premise. I thought the lead performances were really good. They have great chemistry. I found this to be one of the funniest movies of last year. I laughed out loud consistently throughout. I thought the emotional moments worked well. Yeah, it's not like you're going to be bawling with this film, but it might make you tear up at 1 or 2 points. I just found it to be a really enjoyable and entertaining romantic comedy with an interesting twist to the plot. If you didn't give this a shot when it was in cinemas, I recommend checking it out. Don't expect the greatest movie of all time, but I personally kinda loved it. At number whatever we're up to at this point, I've got El Camino, a Breaking Bad movie. This surprised me a bit, because living up to Breaking Bad, one of the greatest TV shows of all time, is such an enormous task. It could also be one of those situations where a property ends and leaves what happens to the characters next to your imagination, and your imagination is obviously always going to be better or cooler to you than what the writers actually decide happened a while later, because you came up with it, so it's what you want to see. So this was kind of set up to be disappointing, and it really wasn't. Vince Gilligan writing and directing this really should have tipped people, including me, off that this wouldn't be disappointing, because he's so good at paying off something that should be impossible to live up to in a way that you're not expecting, but is still satisfying. See the finale of Breaking Bad. So here, this is a pretty low-key story. I'm going to say spoiler alert. I'm going to go into spoilers now, so skip to this time code if you don't want to hear anything. The story really doesn't end much different from how you would probably expect it would when finishing the Breaking Bad series. Jesse gets away. Basically, that's how Breaking Bad ended anyway. But the very personal story in between about Jesse, who was 100% the heart of the show and the darkest time of his pretty dark life, It's very well done. It's a very welcome return to the show and this character, and as someone who loved the show, seeing how this character has evolved and why is very interesting. And Aaron Paul gives a fantastic performance. It's very well shot, some really creative cinematography here, which I appreciated. Like, some of these sequences could have just been shot in a very standard or bland way, but the creative stuff they do here shows the passion and talent that went into this. I didn't think the fan service was too distracting or overdone. It was cool to see Walter again, and it didn't feel like they were trying to force this epic moment with Heisenberg again. It felt mostly natural. And really, I did enjoy how small scale yet impactful this film was. I mean, the climax isn't that crazy in the grand scheme of what they could have made it if they really wanted to make this epic crazy thing, but it works so well. It's small scale, it's emotional, it's a great little epilogue to the show, it gives more insight into a great character. I thoroughly enjoyed this. Alright, then I've got Toy Story 4, speaking of movies that surprised me. For one thing, I'm not even that big of a Toy Story fan. I like all of them, but I grew up with Monsters Inc. and The Incredibles and Up, and I just never really watched Toy Story as a kid. So when people talk so much about the nostalgia and all that, I just can't really relate. They're good, but I'd say this is the best one for me. The biggest concern with this film for me, and I think for most people, is that it would just be a bit of a cash grab. But watching it, it's very clear that, despite this making a lot of cash, this was made because the creators had a good idea for a story that they wanted to tell, and it's told very well. It's quite a funny film, Key and Peele and Keanu stand out. It's incredibly well animated, like there's so much detail in the animation here, it's mind-blowing. And most of all, it's actually emotional. Again, as someone who doesn't even have that much nostalgia for the Toy Story films, this hit me a few times quite a bit, which I really wasn't expecting. From the first scene to the last scene, those bittersweet moments are pulled off so well, from the great voice performances to the music. There were a few subplots that I found predictable. To be fair, it is a kids movie, and I'll be honest, I wasn't crazy about the character of Forky, but on the whole, I was very surprised by how much I liked this. Up next is Rocketman, another film I think I saw on that top 10 worst movies of the year list. No idea how. I thought this was going to be okay at best, but nothing really special, and yeah, this caught me really off guard, as seemingly a lot of these films have. I realize I'm kind of repeating that I was surprised, but hey, I'm just being honest, I wasn't expecting that much from this. Taron Egerton puts in one of the best performances of the year as Elton John, and especially through his performance, the emotional beats of the film hit home almost every time. I also love the music, because not only is it Elton John's amazing music, but they also actually do something different with it. Like, they make their own covers and then create these classic-type musical numbers with incredible choreography that are entertaining and captivating and perfectly capture the tone of a scene. The kind of fantasy elements of the film are integrated perfectly and naturally with the otherwise true story biopic. Richard Madden and Jamie Bell are also great. It doesn't really pull any punches, which I was surprised by. Didn't realize it was rated R before I saw it, but that means they didn't have to cut anything for a rating, which helps to add to the authentic, real feeling of the film. Overall, well-made, entertaining, emotional, one of my favorites this year. Then I saw The Irishman, which was pretty fantastic. It's kind of awesome we got both a Martin Scorsese and a Quentin Tarantino film this year. But hey, they've both clearly still got it. The Irishman is entertaining and thought-provoking. It's bolstered by 3 of the best performances of the year, and hell, I'd even say 4, because Stephen Graham is so good as Tony Pro. There isn't really a standout among the main 3, they're all great in different ways. Pesci plays a more reserved character than in the films I've seen him in, and he pulls it off perfectly. Pacino is suitably over the top, but still manages to be a believable character. And De Niro plays the sympathetic, yet clearly deeply morally flawed Sheeran excellently. I was very impressed with the sets and the costumes and the scale of the whole production. It's just a very immersive film. Everything feels real, which is especially helped with some of the camera work, which shows this very impressive production design. It never feels like the film is trying to hide something, or rather, nothing ever feels like a set. It all feels very authentic. The runtime of the film is something that's been discussed a lot, and honestly, I don't think it's a bad thing. Like, in terms of story, it doesn't really feel bloated. I feel like the time is used correctly. None of it really feels wasted. When the plot isn't really being pushed forward, it's still building these characters, their relationships with each other, and why we care about them, and also still manages to be entertaining, so I wouldn't say it's too long. My only complaint with it would be that the Martin Scorsese style starts to become a bit repetitive. Like, for example, this movie is quite similar to Goodfellas, and towards the start of it, I was thinking, man, you would really start to see the kind of stylistic skeleton behind these Scorsese films if you watch these movies back to back. Because he does have a style that's very good, but it can lead to some aspects of the film becoming predictable. And the thing is, because this movie is so long, it's basically like watching 2 of these movies back to back. So while I really enjoy Scorsese's style and find it very entertaining, when the film is so long, it started to become a bit repetitive and predictable. But honestly, not a major complaint, really. The de-aging was great for most of it, although sometimes it's just noticeable. I can't even say it's bad, but it's that uncanny valley thing where I'm like, I know that's not young Robert De Niro, and even though I can't say why, it just looks off. but especially given its runtime, you settle into it and it becomes less noticeable. The film's also very well written, it's funny, but also the dark or more tragic elements of the story never feel cheap or forced in, the ending especially being quite poignant, with the exception of the subplot with Sheeran's daughter, which I didn't find that engaging. But overall, a gangster epic. If you like Scorsese's films, this is like textbook Scorsese gangster film, and he does it very well. Alright, getting close to the top now, I've got Us. I had huge expectations for this based on Jordan Peele's previous film, Get Out, and while it isn't as good as Get Out, it's still fantastic. Besides not being quite as well paced, it has most of what made Get Out great. Effective horror, effective comedy, good characters, great cinematography, interesting twists. In terms of performances, it may actually be more impressive than Get Out, or maybe not, at least on the same level. I should stop comparing them. Anyway, everyone's great as both themselves and their tethered versions. Personally, I love the Winston Duke character, probably my favorite in the film and has the funniest moments, but Lupita Nyong'o is spectacular, and the fact that it doesn't look like she's going to get recognized by the Oscars for her work is a shame. The foreshadowing, symbolism, and just layered net of connections throughout the film is also so impressive. This is a movie you can watch dozens of times and still pick up on new things, and also make your own theories on what the message of the film is and what it's trying to convey. If you just want a creepy horror movie, this absolutely has that. If you want a movie to really analyze and sink your teeth into, it has that as well. It's a great film, can't wait to see what Peele does next. Yes, alright, this did make it in my top 3. These aren't the most perfect movies of 2019. These are the movies I liked the most in 2019, and Avengers Endgame is up there. Yes, plot-wise, there are quite a few holes, just as there are with most MCU movies, but this one more so because it deals with time travel. And yes, I'm not crazy about some of the directions certain characters were taken, and some of the humor doesn't work so well, although some of it really does. And like Infinity War, it's kind of oddly paced. But a movie that successfully pays off the last decade of MCU films with satisfying character arcs for several characters, including rectifying problems of the past, giving fans moments they've wanted to see, and having dozens and dozens of characters and still not losing focus, it's such an impressive feat. Plus, it's just an entertaining movie all around, with a fun premise that ties this whole universe together. This is an example of fan service working. Some properties this year felt like they were written by fans, and that didn't work out so well. This movie felt like it was written by fans in the best way possible. These writers knew what the fans wanted to see, but also didn't let that get in the way of telling a coherent story or respecting what came before in terms of character. If anything, that's the backbone for this whole film. I plan on making a video going in-depth on Endgame sometime, but for now I'll say the MCU is one of, if not my favorite franchise. I've been watching it for years and years. There's no way that this culmination should have been satisfying, but they pulled it off. It was an event seeing this film. It's fun, it's emotional. No, it's not the most technically perfect movie of the year, but it was one of my absolute favorites. Then, in the runner-up spot, I've got Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. This was actually the first time I've gotten to see a Quentin Tarantino film in cinemas, so just as a side note, that was pretty cool. Also, I'm going to go into spoilers, so if you don't want this to be spoiled, skip to this point. 3, 2, 1, okay. I know some people have a problem with the first 2 hours and then love the last half hour, or they hate that last half hour but love the first 2 hours. I love both. I've always been impressed with Tarantino's writing, with which there can be long, extended scenes where nothing's really happening plot-wise. It's really just building the characters through them talking about whatever. And this movie is the epitome of that. Not a lot plot-wise is happening for quite a bit of the film, and I can understand why some people hate that and say it's boring. But through that previously mentioned writing and the 2 fantastic lead performances, possibly my 2 favorite performances this year, pretty much all of those scenes are made entertaining or engaging. I love that these characters are somewhat over the top, but are also entirely believable because of how they're portrayed by Pitt and DiCaprio. The movie has an amazing soundtrack, a ton of the side characters are memorable, the sets are perfect, and this 1969 world is completely immersive. It's one of the funniest films of the year. It's possibly one of Tarantino's more emotional films. Not like it's gonna make you cry or anything, but Rick Dalton's character arc, while played for laughs sometimes, is satisfying, as well as how his friendship with Booth plays out in the film. I can also understand people's frustrations with the Sharon Tate character played by Margot Robbie, as she is basically entirely detached from the main plot and doesn't serve any story purpose really, besides subverting the expectations of the audience who knows the true story. But to be honest, even on the second viewing, when I knew how this was going to end, I wasn't bored in any of her scenes. Again, they're entertaining or sweet in their own right. Like her watching the audience reactions to her film in the cinema is quite a sweet scene. I'm not acting like every scene is absolutely necessary or every shot of Brad Pitt driving around is totally integral to the film, but I'm saying for the most part, that didn't drag this down for me. And then the finale, yes, it comes out of left field because most of the movie isn't at all like that, but I'd be lying if I said this wasn't one of the funniest movie scenes of the year. I can totally understand if you find it horrible and not funny at all, But I can also understand if you did find it funny, just because of how shocking and over the top it is, and the ways in which that some of the elements that come into play were set up previously, and how the scene itself is written, and how these characters that you've come to like react to this, again, quite out of left field scenario that happens upon them. I saw this with my dad and then with one of my friends, and both times I haven't heard an audience react so much in the cinema the whole year, and both times the cinema was packed.
You are...
I'm the devil, and I'm here to do the devil's business.
No, I was dumber than that.
Also, given that it's a twist on a real event that was terrible, it's a bit like Inglourious Basterds, where this seems like Tarantino saying he wished this could have happened instead of what actually happened. This is one of those films that I can totally understand if someone didn't like for multiple reasons, but I loved it. And then, finally, my number one of the year at the moment is Knives Out. This is definitely going to be a classic. It's one of the most fun cinema experiences I had all year. It's an original story. It's very creative. It takes a classic murder mystery type story, puts it in the modern day, plays with the tropes and cliches of the genre while still bringing something new to the table, and structuring it in a surprising way. The ending is mostly unpredictable but still satisfying. It has laugh-out-loud comedy. It has one of the most fun performances of the year from Daniel Craig. Ana de Armas is fantastic. Each supporting character, from those who have a lot to do to those who have very minor roles, are great and are memorable and distinct. The action scenes are exciting. It has political themes that are interesting and come naturally from the story and the characters. It has a good moral message, it's well structured, it's fantastically shot, it's everything you want from a film. I'm sorry I don't sound more excited, my voice is nearly gone. I think it'd be hard to find someone who didn't enjoy this on some level. I won't spoil anything about it, but Knives Out has got to be my favorite movie of the year. It's spectacular. See it if you haven't already. I can almost guarantee you won't be disappointed. So, that was how I'd rank the movies I've seen in 2019 so far. Again, there may be a part 2 once I've seen more films. What did you think of my list? Let me know all of your thoughts down below in the comments. While you're at it, be sure to like this video, check out my Instagram and Twitter at BHL_Hudson, and subscribe for more videos like the one you just watched. I know normally at the end of the year I do like a yearly recap thing. I might still do that, maybe in the next video, I don't know. But for now, I hope you have a great new year, and yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.